Welcome back to the Code Wars podcast, where we explore the intersection of technology and geopolitics. This episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Headmark Advisory. In today's complex landscape, making the right strategic decision is critical. Headmark Advisory provides the expert analysis and guidance organizations need to navigate uncertainty, unlock opportunity with AI, and stay ahead. But technology is an industry focused on bits and bytes, so it can be easy to forget the human element. What happens when you combine deep technical expertise with a profound understanding of human behavior? Our guest today does exactly that. Marijn Markus is a data scientist, a social scientist, a writer, and one of the most prolific commentators on LinkedIn, providing insights into technology, ethics, misinformation, and Russia's war on Ukraine. For almost a decade, he has led AI efforts at a global consultancy, taking projects from initial research all the way into production with one core mission: to improve people's lives through data. Welcome, Marijn Markus. Thank you very much for joining us on the Code Wars.
Thank you for having me, my man. Honored to be here.
We're going to kick off and get into really what is your connection to Ukraine, because I've seen your posts. You're passionate about it. You're passionate about data and all of this, but I really haven't seen sort of where your connection comes from. Tell us a little bit more.
The short story is that it is all connected. My background is social science, a lot of statistics, criminology, human behavior. But my first intro into the actual field of data science and AI, which we back then called big data and statistics, it was not sexy. Now it's all AI. Now I'm sexy. But I actually focused on misinformation back then. We're talking 2013, 14, 15. And that's when MH17 happened. If you remember that, when civilian airplane was shot down over eastern Ukraine, containing almost 200 of my countrymen. I'm Dutch. And I was studying misinformation in university at the time, reading old Soviet-era books written by the Frankfurt Schule about the fire hose of falsehood tactics and stuff, about how you drown truth in an ocean of cheap lies. Then I looked at Dutch national news saying, well, Ukraine says that Russia shot down MH17, but Russia says that Ukraine shot down MH17, and also the Americans and NATO and the CIA, and probably also the Jews. Which is the classic, exact same fire hose of falsehood method that not just the Soviets used, because they in turn stole it from their former allies during World War II, Nazi Germany. And again, the Frankfurt Schule wrote about this extensively. This is basic communication science. And it was like studying dinosaurs. You read about it in books and you look out the window and you see a dinosaur. Because that was my moment in my career, again, a decade ago, when I realized that the stuff I studied in books about misinformation, information warfare of the past, was still real and alive today and happening online on the internet today. So that's when I somewhat pivoted my career from, hey, all my fellow students at the time were doing surveys on people's opinions, and I'm like, hell no, I'm gonna scrape Twitter before it became shitter, if you know what I mean. So my very first experience with scripting and coding was building scrapers in R, and for those who know, you do not build web scrapers in R. To pull data on the Dutch discourse on refugees from Syria at the time. Which is another joke, because the huge Syrian refugee crisis in Europe, 1 million Syrian refugees entering Europe, was caused by the same mother fluffers who shot down MH17, Moscow. People often forget that the Syrian civil war really escalated, not in 2013, but in 15, when Putin came to the aid of Assad, saying, here, have these jets, have these bombs, let's bomb Aleppo into the ground. And that's what turned 12 million, it displaced 12 million people. Keep this for context, because we don't talk about Syria often enough. Displaced 12 million people, turned 6 million into refugees, and sent 1 million people into Europe. which was again in part caused by the same entity who invaded Ukraine, who before in 2008 invaded Georgia, who in 1999 invaded and bombed Chechnya. And this is why I say it is all connected, because I became a data scientist. I've worked in policy research for governments, for police, for justice and safety, in refugee change, worked with Syrians. And the more I learned, the more I know that stuff is all connected, because the Syrian refugees entering Europe was because of bombing runs by Russia. Famines in many parts of the world because there were grain shortages, because everyone was reliant on Ukrainian grain, are also caused by the same entity who's throwing those bombs. And the airplane shot down that took the lives of 96 of my countrymen, that was also that same Russia. All these roads lead to Moscow. Or to quote Garry Kasparov, a Russian world chess master, who I know from his work in AI, also do AI, said that something to the extent of all terrorism worldwide, its finances can be drawn back to Moscow.
Let's jump forward to sort of 2022, which is probably when I started to see you post more and more on these issues, and also on Ukrainian issues. Have you had a chance to head to Kyiv or to Ukraine over the last 3 years to sort of meet some of these people, to see firsthand some of the disinformation and work with AI and see what's happening on the ground?
I was in Ukraine just a few months ago. Been to Kyiv and beyond multiple times. I got this fancy hat from Spencer. Spencer, if you're listening, thanks for the hat. While in Kyiv, make Ukraine great again. The fact that an American gave it to me in Ukraine is just icing on the cake, you know. I was already writing for a few years on the field of data and ethics, because that is my field. As a consultant, I manage teams, we build stuff. But if you want to get good at anything in this life, you have to do it over and over. So in 2020, during COVID, I told myself I'm going to write about data and ethics on LinkedIn every day, because that's the only way I'll get better at writing. Now, fast forward a few years, I was writing again about Syria, about Uyghurs in China, about human rights abuses in India, and I got a sizable, okay-ish following because of that. Then the full-scale invasion began, and I asked myself, I now have a following, and I can do something with that following. A decade ago, during MH17, there's nothing I could do, because I was a tiny student with no money and no voice. Now I have a voice. What kind of man am I if I have the opportunity and the power to do something, and I do nothing? We are all guilty of all the good we didn't commit. And that's why from February 22 onwards, I've been shitposting about Ukraine every damn day. Because that is in parts my way to contribute to helping us solve the biggest war in Europe since World War II. Because we're not going to fix that by looking away. We sure as hell didn't fix World War I or II either by looking away. This is why I go to Ukraine. This is why I join fundraisers. This is why I wear hats. Why I use my voice online. This is why we print and ship drones. Because we can't all do everything. I'm shit with an AK. I tried. I'm really bad. We can't all do everything, but we can all do something. And if we all do something, this world would be a far better place.
What you probably would have seen then over the last 10 years is the changing shape of the way disinformation is distributed, the way AI or data science is being used to be able to target more effectively, how it's been able to, enhance that fire hose of truth that you're talking about. What are some of the biggest things that you've seen change over the last 10 years in the way that disinformation, not just from Russians, but also from, various state and non-state actors, have changed over the last 10 years?
So let me distinguish a few things here, because I'm going to talk about a lot about disinformation in a bit and how that changed. But tech in general, we now say AI when we have fancy machine learning or large language models. But do you remember 2012, 13, when we had the first image recognition, computer vision models, with a model that said this is a cat and this is a dog? Andrew Ng was using 1,000 computers at the time to compute one of those models, because we had CPUs, not GPUs. That was a little over a decade ago that we, for the first time, could let a computer look at something and go like, oh, this is a thing. A decade later, every self-driving car in the world has that tech baked in, and that's how they navigate. That's how they see this is a person, that's a lantern pole, that is a dog, I should not hit the dog. But the exact same techniques, OpenCV V8 and stuff, are also used to power autonomous drones. Meaning killer drones, that FPV drones that can carry a 2-kilogram warhead, fly 50, 60 kilometers per hour and go like, ooh, this is a tank. Ooh, that is a forehead. And go boom. 10 years ago, we invented this tech. Now it's everywhere, driving our cars and blowing up dudes in the east of Europe. Now, why am I mentioning this? Because we invented this tech a decade ago and now it's everywhere. Well, the models themselves, the machine learning models behind them, we have had for decades already. We used that to recognize script and handwriting. But photos of handwriting, that's like 4 5 by 5 pixels. We did not have to compute to do that for 5,000 times 5,000 pixels. Meaning it was not about the new piece of tech pushing us forward. It was about the old piece of tech, computing power, chips, holding us back. And once we fixed that, we scaled from this is cat dog to let's apply more warheads to foreheads.
And that
within
changed,
a decade.
though.
Meaning it's not about the new tech.
That changed, though, in the chips and the compute power. When would you say that is? I mean, I was starting to see it used more and more effectively, good GPUs, probably 2018, maybe 2017, but definitely by 2019, we were doing, much larger jobs in this space. When did you see the change?
There you have also the irony, because the whole GPU breakthrough happened in 2013, 14. That's when the first Atlas NVIDIA GPUs started being used. Because again, neural nets, we had these models for decades also. But then we said, hey, these models get better the more compute you have. And we have these GPUs, graphical processing units, meant for video games. And they can do a lot of compute. What if we run one of these models on this thing with a lot of compute? Again, we had this stuff for decades, but we didn't bring it together, or the conditions weren't there. My field of AI exists thanks to video games. I frequently remind my dad of this, of course. But so in 2013, 14, we started seeing the switch. That led to the deep learning boom of 14, 15, 16, when we realized, whoa, we get a lot of GPUs, we can train models to do very complicated things. And a few years later, because we started using this for image recognition as well, we started miniaturizing it and slapping it onto drones in 23, really. But drone warfare, for example, was already happening in 2016 in Syria, when ISIS was using retail drones, Mavics and stuffs, and DJI to drop grenades onto American Abrams tanks, which makes it exceptionally funny that we now see American military this year bragging about having the ability and the capacity to drop a drone from a grenade, when literally dudes on camels were doing that to American tanks 9 years before. Again, it's not about the new pieces of tech. It was about the old pieces of tech holding it back. And in this case, it was about miniaturizing those targeting systems and miniaturizing the targets. Because another topic that is frequently raised here is killer AI, and whether or not we should have all kinds of opinions or all kinds of rules or laws against it. As if people care that much for rules and laws in active warfare or crime, for example, which are the most innovative fields out there. When in reality, we have had killer AI systems for decades already as well. What is a Patriot? What is a harpoon? I think you know that better than I do. A Patriot anti-air system is a huge missile that blows up an aerial target fully autonomously. Why? Because hypersonic missiles or fast cruise missiles coming into your country, they go so fast that humans cannot target it and push a button, because by the time they see it, it's already passed. Meaning we have, decades ago, during the Cold War, automated systems to kill airborne targets, and that could be a missile, that could be an airplane carrying a few hundred innocent souls, and we are A-okay with having these systems, giving these automated systems the ability to kill large amounts of people, because the cost of not doing so means that you cannot defend yourself against incoming cruise or ballistic missiles. But those targeting systems were based on radar and stuff, and now we use image recognition AI so we can target individual people rather than aircraft.
I think what's interesting in this part of it, and we dive into a bit of sort of the ethics around here as well. That last bit of the kill chain, the launching of the Patriot missile, the various systems engaging, they still have a human involved and monitoring it. When I was in the Navy, you would monitor the missiles and the threat until it hit the target. What we're probably seeing now, and I think Operation Spiderweb showed it a little bit, the recent Ukrainian attack on long-range bombers, that maybe we don't even need humans in that part of the kill chain. The technology's there, but are we there?
So humans at some point become optional, or we call it human in the loop in my field, that we need to have some sort of human involved saying yes, go, or no, do not. But again, the dynamics of the situation determine to what extent you can do it. Because again, if that missile is too fast for the human to even track, then you need to let the system autonomously shoot that thing down, because humans just aren't fast enough. This is completely different from, say, frontline Ukraine, where you have jamming. So you just see a tank in the distance and you lock your drone onto that tank, and it will fly autonomously into the jamming area where you can no longer control it, and it will go boom against the tank. Then you still have the human involved pressing the go button. But this is much more about restrictions than about what's possible. If we look at EU AI legislation, for example, it's all about the theory and there needs to be a human involved somehow. And AI models cannot be biased, for example. While in practice, those things are not all possible all at the same time. You cannot have fully transparent and fully unbiased models, because models are biased by default. What is a model? A simplification and a generalization of reality based on a number of observations or data. Every machine learning model, every AI model is based on data. And data is limited. Therefore, models are limited. Every model has biases and generalizations. It's just some we are okay with and some we are not okay with. Because recognizing, hey, this is a missile, let's go boom, or hey, this is fraud, or hey, this person is pulling out a gun, it's fine. But biases like, hey, I am not giving loans to this person because of the color of the skin or because of their gender, that is bad. From a technical perspective, it is the same. It's generalization and sticking a label onto it. But some we are okay with and some we are not okay with. And that is our human in the loop in building these models. But we should not pretend that these models are somehow not biased one time, but they are the other time, when in reality they always are, because it's always based on assumptions. And I have so many conversations with people who expect the model to be 100% accurate. Well, they never make mistakes, while humans make mistakes all the time, and it's an unfair comparison. Without realizing that how these models work, because these are statistical models. They are dice rolls at their core. It's incredibly accurate dice rolls, but it is still a dice roll, and a dice is never 100% correct. But again, neither are humans.
The human element of AI, and this is probably the segue into back to the disinformation and misinformation that we were talking about before. How are these models, now we see them, how are they sort of really starting to target people more effectively now than they say were 10 years ago? You know, we've gone through the model enhancements, we've gone through the compute power. We know that they can operate without humans in the loop. So how's that impacting our disinformation?
So let me get slightly back here to the theory, because when we say AI models, we mean different things throughout history. In the 60s and in the 80s, we had AI crazes followed by AI winters when there was less investment, and now we have another AI craze thanks to first GPUs and then transformers like ChatGPT, which only increases the hype and the expectations. But in the 80s, for example, we focused much on expert models, so rules-based. Hey, if we just write everything down into a model, it will work. Whereas today we are focusing much less on rules-based if-then models and much more on statistical odds-based models, because the things we considered AI back then, like, look, a computer can look up a piece of information for me, we no longer consider AI or sexy today. Google is the most successful piece of AI in human history because we use it every damn day, and we don't even realize it anymore that 20, 30 years ago, search engines were cutting edge in AI. You put in a word and it finds relevant other information. That was crazy back then. But now it's become so normalized that we don't even think about it anymore. We don't even call it search engines anymore. We call it Googling. So AI has a real impact, not because when it's sexy or on the front cover of Times or makes you a lot of money, but when it becomes an integrated part of your everyday life. That can either be as a citizen when you Google or you Netflix, or that can be in war, when on a daily basis you're launching drones that are fully autonomously finding their targets. I am mentioning this because standardization and then mass production are the real game changers, not inventing something new. We had, again, also like a decade ago, we had tiny drones from the American military industrial complex that with like a bullet underneath that could fly into somebody's forehead based on recognizing their face. But that stuff was way too expensive to mass produce and is thus useless in actual full-scale war, because miniaturization and mass production as cheaply as possible are the engines for actual war, whereas the American military-industrial complex, with all my love and respect, was focusing on very high-end, very expensive stuff that we in Europe now also deal with. A general joked to me, "Oh yeah, if the Russians invade the Baltics, we'll slap the Russians for a month, devastate them, and then we run out of ammunition." Because we too, depending on how conservative your math is, but yes, we do not have the gear for a prolonged war. We just assume we launch all our missiles and we blow up all their shit and it's over. Hopefully this works. But, Moscow knows this, so they will not start that full-out war where they risk having all their stuff blown up. Well, they just do it bit by bit. Jam the airplane of EU commissioners, which was apparently drone-based, if messages from this morning are confirmed. Bit by bit. So back to we need to scale and mass produce stuff. The same goes for misinformation. We can only affect large numbers of people when we have easy ways to mass produce and mass influence people. 2014, not only MH17, but also Brexit and the 2016 American elections, again, I was studying back then, were great demonstrations of mass disinformation and mass influencing operations, not just from Russia. I mean, there was also servers running in Bangladesh. You see a lot in Iran these days, in India. People pretending to be Americans raised and born in Texas, but with an IP address from Bangladesh or whatever, who then talk about warm water ports, which is a Russian word because Russia is literally the only country that has cold water ports and no warm water ports in winter outside of the Black Sea. So you know they're auto-translating it. But look at how we in the West try to fight this misinformation by debunking tiny bits of it, by having fact checkers, by having some fancy journalists that take the fire hose of bullshit and try to debunk little specks of it. Do you think that works? Hell no. Because we do not scale. We cannot scale our debunking. And to quote Winston Churchill, a lie is already halfway across the world before truth has a chance to get its pants on. Meaning we cannot fight mass disinformation by trying to debunk tiny bits of it, because the masses will already have heard the lie and gone retweet it 50 times and it goes viral, like Macron waiting in the White House despite having 3 legs. Though in Macron's case, like, I'm not going to question that. But the point here is that we get the whole misinformation thing wrong. And I'm going to quote a very brave man in Ukraine right now who told me this, that you cannot win a war by staying only on the defensive. And you cannot win an information war by only staying on the defensive. You cannot just try... No. Here's the quote. You cannot win by only trying to not get fluffed. You need to fluff back. And that is our principal misunderstanding of misinformation in the modern day, that we let the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, everybody bombard our European, American, Western societies with mass numbers of misinformation, mass amounts, and heck, some of our politicians are in on it and thrive on it. And we try to fight back with tiny, verified voices. That does not work. And I'm not sure how this is going to go in the future, but at some point you need to start spamming back and flood them in turn.
In the Cold War, Western governments were very good at, fighting this. They were very good at information warfare. We learnt, we were some of the best during World War II.
Radio-free Europe.
What's happened? Why have we lost it? Is it because the Cold War ended and that threat and that peace dividend came through? Or is it just we haven't grasped the technology?
Well, we have digitized and automated a lot of stuff that used to be manual. That is a big game changer compared to like Cold War era. Back then you needed humans to spam messages. Nowadays you can just have agents pretending to be humans, or dudes in a server stack being paid in rubles, pretending to be Americans or pretending to be Europeans. Which is, for example, why all the day today in the news you hear so much about the quality of life being terrible in London. There's trash and stabbings everywhere. You never hear that about, say, Dubai. Why? Because this is just modern marketing campaigns to shit on one holiday destination to get more to come to yours. It's funny that we only hear these stories about the first world. Actually, local story. I live in Rotterdam. People were shot in the neighborhood where I live, and that's why I bought the house here. And my mom called me within 30 minutes, like, Marijn, you're not going to live there. People were shot there. It's on the news. And I'm like, Mom, this was an outlier. This is the safest neighborhood in the entire city. I know this. I ran these numbers for the police. This happens south of the river every month. doesn't even make the news. This was an outlier event, but because it's such an outlier event, we exaggerate it and think it's huge, when in reality it's not. But that lack of context and that lack of insight at scale is how misinformation at the micro level is so impactful. And nowadays we don't need humans to spread that anymore. We can just use agents for that. And that's why I'm so obsessed with misinformation, because in my day-to-day job I work on, well, AI, building systems that can detect fraud, that can look up information for you, that can help you automate systems. But the field where we see this applied the most is modern information warfare and crime.
It's been a busy 3 years around misinformation, and we continue to see it. We see, if I focus back in the Ukraine story, we see it a lot with the Russians around, the legitimacy of Zelensky, the anti-corruption task force. All of these kinds of things are sort of targets. But do you think over the 3 years we've got better, or at least Ukraine has got better, and then the West has got better at picking it and fighting it, or are we continuing to lose?
Yes and no. Yes and no. So the whole Zelensky is illegitimate narrative is a joke coming from the Russians, because Putin has been in power for 25 years and murders all his opposition. The whole corruption story is similarly misinformation, because again, Russia is far more corrupt, according to CPI and other indexes, than Ukraine. And actually, Ukraine is getting better and is now less corrupt than some EU countries, while Russia is just getting worse. And Russia is, again, the biggest source of corruption in Ukraine. And some Western media agencies are slightly picking up on, okay, this is a misinformation, a false narrative being pushed. Some, to this day, like the New York Times, continue to just copy-paste news coming from Russia without adding the disclaimer that, hey, this is coming from a source known to lie more than they breathe. Because back in the day, journalists wouldn't, in my opinion, shouldn't report. Some guy says it's raining, the other says there's sunshine. Your job is to open the damn window and look outside and fact-check both. But we have become so used to just copy-pasting stuff and narratives because of the speed and the velocity. And that brings us back to the Cold War comparison. When we, the West, were good at this stuff, it's because it's become far faster, because everything is now internet and apps that every idiot can use. Oh, my kid is so good with the tablet. We test the tablet apps on monkeys. Of course your kid is good with it. But that's not a compliment towards your kid, Grandma. The speed and the velocity has become far greater, and the entry barriers have become far lower, because anybody with a generated profile can now pretend to be an authentic, real human, and let's go. So, and then there's the end of history, of course, where we thought, big wars are over, Cold War is over, the wall has fell because some dudes, some liberals shouted at it. And we have forgotten systematically there that autocracies do not win. Autocracies fail all the time. To cite my own post from a few days ago. Today we see so many people going like, oh yeah, but maybe a dictator is a better idea, because then you can get stuff done. But the myth of a philosopher god king, as the Greeks said it, that yes, a benevolent dictator would be the best idea as long as he's all-knowing and actually benevolent, which they never are. And here's the main thing, because they cannot admit mistakes. In a democracy, government failure is a feature, because you just re-elect and get a different one. In a totalitarian state, failure is lethal, so they will never admit to their mistakes, which is why most autocracies throughout history end up crumbling because of their own failures. And the greatest example of that today is China, where we see in our lifetimes their entire demographic collapse because Deng Xiaoping 50 years ago said, oh yeah, it's a great idea, one-child policy. And he will never admit that mistake. And because of failure then, China is going the way of Japan, stagnating. Yes, still strong now, but autocracies fail in the long term. They just seem efficient in the short term to the uneducated who are fascinated by fascist strongman leaders who talk big in the short term but fail to deliver solutions in the long term. Meanwhile, Europe is now outspending America on defense, while America is sending their own National Guard into the streets to keep the riots in DC under control.
What's interesting is that people are starting to become more aware. They're fighting back, like on the little side of things, like you were saying before. They're trying to fact check their way out, which is not scalable. With the flood of misinformation that's continuing to be used, and it's not just the Russians, it's not just the other state actors. It's people within our own democracies that have been able to master this and be able to influence operations. I'm not going to name names, but we all know who they are in our various democracies. How do we fight against it?
So, to some extent, we must avoid entering serious debate, because the classic, again, Soviet tactic that's repeated to this day is to have them repeat your lies and your false narratives in order to debunk it. But the moment I repeat, Russia says it's all NATO's fault, and then explain why that's bullshit, because sovereign nations join NATO, and if you say Ukraine cannot join NATO because Russia says so, then Ukraine is not a sovereign nation that cannot make their own decisions. Then you're basically saying it should be a colony that others decide their fate, and you favor colonialism and imperialism, you bastard. But that first line, NATO is to blame, will already have been spread 50 times across 3 different news channels and have been reposted by 50 different influencers who just make money, are rewarded and make money on X, not because they post truth, but because they post popular stuff. So at some point, lying became profitable. Most social media platforms directly pay you for lying because you will trend more spreading lies, and you get more ad revenue. And as long as we continue to pay for the lies, there will be lies. And this is just one small part of the problem, but we have created a system in our beautiful West. Again, this doesn't even exist in the rest of the world. So before we criticize it, like in North Korea, you're not gonna have any of this. We have created a dynamic where we let misinformants thrive because they can make money off of it. Heck, they can get elected because of it, because there's no such thing as bad publicity. That's how you become president of America. So the number one way to fight back is to stop repeating all their nonsense all the time at the micro level, and stop enabling them to repeat and spread their lies at the macro level. But for that, we need to change the way social media algorithms operate to some extent. And for that, yes, we would need a strong Europe with proper legislation that goes beyond AI shouldn't be evil.
It was interesting. You also said that we can't fight misinformation by being always on the defensive. You've got to go on the attack. How do you go on the attack?
Well, for example, here we fight an asymmetric war, and China is ahead of us on this because they built the Great Chinese Firewall. You cannot access Chinese media, social media, outside of China, and the other way around, meaning they have total control over there, and we cannot infiltrate or influence that in the same way that autocrats and the new axis of evil can influence ours. We see Russia try to do the same thing today, installing that Max app on every single device that they have, which is an app that just tracks your GPS 24/7 and occasionally takes photos of your everything. Again, total surveillance. iPhones are going to disappear from Russia over time because iPhones do not allow that in the store. Any smartphone in Russia is demanded by law to either install or have it pre-installed. The Max app is basically a messaging app controlled by Moscow, by the Kremlin, And they're outlawing WhatsApp, Telegram, which they also control, Signal, everything, to force all the population to start using this easily monitored app that in turn will allow them to keep tabs on all the population. 1984 was not fiction; it was a documentary. So the autocrats, because again, autocrats can get shit done in the short term, but they fail in the long term. In the short term, they are already preparing their population and their societies to building digital defensive walls, so others can't get to them. Because again, now we go back to the Cold War. What did the Allied forces do so spectacularly well during and after World War II and in the Cold War? Radio Free Europe. My dad to this day is a member of Veronica magazine because they were broadcasting from a boat somewhere in the North Sea. Radio. World War II. My grandparents were listening to radio broadcast by the British to the Dutch from that range, because people stuck in an autocratic system will still seek information from outside. And we made sure that all that information and that media about the good Western life was available, freely available, which is why it's such a tragedy that we now under Trump see the US cut Radio Free Europe for when that thing helped win the Cold War, that service. And we will need to rediscover that to actually be the Western propagandists that they claim us to be, to show that, yeah, freedom wins. Democracy is worth fighting for. We have the highest standards of life here in Europe, in all of the world, across all of history. We have the best healthcare, we have the best life standards, the best education, the best, human rights, protection, laws, tech, everything. Yeah, house prices and gas prices are high. But what are we complaining about when across the Atlantic school shootings are crazy, and every other part of the world, with exceptions to Australia and Japan, I guess, you live in a totalitarian regime. We have it so ridiculously good here, and we take it for granted, and that gets me riled up because I'm frustrated how much we take our wealth and our prosperity for granted, because gifts you take for granted you become unworthy of. But we need to spread this, hey, check our standards of life over here. Check our military capacity. Again, we now spend more on military than even the US. We have the best steelworks in the world. We have the Hadron Colliders. The only thing we Europeans lack is a belief in ourselves, because the last time we believed in ourselves, we conquered the whole damn world and ruled it for several centuries, to the extent that today the world is ruled by our illegitimate stepchild, the USA. One great way to keep the peace, because I'm talking about standards of living here, that worked real well for Xi in China, is that the Chinese kept having their living standards improve. Putin had basically the same kind of contract with the population. I will keep improving your lives. You don't care what I do to the minorities, to the Muslims, stick them into camps, blow them up, whatever. And that's treaty with the population that most dictators have. Just don't bother the masses. They won't bother you about the minorities. That works for a certain amount of time. But now we see living standards in many parts of China stop growing because they're approaching Western levels in some parts, but they cannot progress beyond because they've just been copying all the tech and stuff of the West. And yeah, sure, they have faster, bigger trains. Really cool trains. But from a planned economy, most of those trains are never even used by the population. So what I'm trying to tell here is that we should not discern short-term gains. Again, totalitarian systems can do a lot of stuff in the short term that democratic institutions can only get done in the long term, but it's not sustainable because China will now collapse. In 2050, they will have a third of their country will be retired, will be elderly, and they got no babies. If we complain over here about too little babies, wait till you see over there. Yet all the people who in this country, this part of the world, complaining about too little babies on the far right, they praise the systems that have far worse baby shortages. They criticize refugees while praising the totalitarians like Putin who caused those refugee waves. And if you thought Europe was struggling with 1 million refugees from Syria, wait what happens when we get 20 million refugees from Ukraine, because that is what would happen if Ukraine were to fall. And then we would break totally.
Well, it's probably a good segue to, we've talked through, drones, the use of AI in warfare. We've talked through misinformation and the use of technology to do that. Can you see anything coming or are you starting to see the shape of something coming that really is a next sort of evolution in technology that we're starting to see maybe on the battlefield in Ukraine?
So the main thing we were talking about here is integration of different pieces of tech, because it's not about the new stuff, it's about the legacy holding the rest back. And if we compare now to 3.5 years ago, which was Cold War era Soviet versus Soviet gear with some javelins sprinkled in, compared to now a 10-kilometer death zone with FPVs, half of them AI controlled, flying everywhere. Don't forget, Operation Spiderweb was in part autonomous AI controlled, because we only have footage of one of the 4 locations, airports, that got struck. There is no footage of over half the locations struck because there was no connection to the drones. They were autonomously launching from the truck and going boom. $300 drone blowing up a 300 million A-50 tactical strategic bomber. One in a million return on investment. That's the biggest bang for your buck in human military history. But I expect asymmetrical warfare to happen, because we just talked a lot about image recognition AI. But the foreign agents of the future are not humans. The foreign agents of the future are code. Right now, again, Rotterdam, biggest port, we have 70 to 80% of all cocaine in Europe passing through our harbor. Antwerp is stealing part of our business, but let's just ignore that for now. How do you think that transport happens? That's kids being paid over Telegram to go take that bag and bring it over there. And that contains cocaine or heroin or whatever. Next time it will contain a bomb. And they can just Google or ask ChatGPT how to print that bomb or grenade and what parts to mix. Heck, I built this last week. It worked. I have an agent that can just look me up how to build a smoke grenade, how to print it, what parts to get, what to buy or order where. And that's if a consultant like me can do this, then a 13-year-old sure as hell also can.
The battle is around the code that you develop and being able to build the best AI or being able to build the best misinformation or whatever it is. That's where the battle is. You're still going to have the soldiers, you're still going to have the sailors and the airmen that are going to be fighting, but there is that asymmetric warfare that's going to continue to grow.
It's about scaling, and we talked about that extensively. I fully expect us to scale AI as agents to trick us. They try to pretend to be my friends on Discord and try to hack me. And they won't fool me, but they will fool the elderly and the most vulnerable, and they will fool our children. And that's what I'm worried about. The Ukrainian politicians shot in Lviv a few days. Well, that was performed by a local Ukrainian man who got blackmailed into it by the Russians because they had the body of his son who lost his life fighting at the front. A few months ago, when I was in Kiev, the YouTuber guy got shot. That was not by a Russian agent. That was by a lady walking in the streets, again being pressured into it from afar. But you don't need a human to be blackmailing humans. You can use a large language model, and they will scale this stuff against us far faster than we can scale a chatbot to sell more hot dogs or whatever. Finally, the biggest challenge for us remains human error. Image generation, deep fakes are only recognizable, fake from real, because of human error these days. And let's not forget that entire spiderweb operation was delayed by a month because the Russian drivers they hired for the trucks were drunk. And there is no amount of tech or AI that can account for human stupidity, which makes my job fun. But we have so much tech at our disposal, and we have the most brilliant, most brilliant people, best part of the world. And I just wish we were to use that, leverage that, and fight for all these gifts that we have in free democratic Europe instead of taking them for granted. Because the Ukrainians are fighting for all the things that we have. And at some point, it feels like they deserve it more than we do.
Marijn, thank you very much for your time today. It's been wonderful to chat. That's a great poignant statement to end on. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening. If you'd like to hear more from us, remember to like, subscribe and share on wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to join us in the conversation on Instagram, Threads and Substack. Until next time, I'm your host Hugh Simpson, and you've been listening to The Code Wars, your podcast that explores the intersection of technology, power, and the changing nature of conflict.